the province, the Dairy Vet and Science Club welcomes our guest speakers, Steph Towers and Josh Arp, as they talk about calf care and hoof health. Steph Towers lives in Glencoe, Ontario with her husband and 2 children. Together with Cameron's parents, they own and operate Max Villa Farms Limited. They are currently milking 120 cows in a rotary parlor and running close to 1,200 acres of land. They have recently expanded their operation to include custom raising calves and heifers for another local herd. Prior to Max Villa Farms, Steph worked for Stanton's Brothers Limited for 6 years, where she was able to acquire a broad skill set and gain valuable experience at one of the top genomic herds in Canada. Josh lives in Norwalk, Ohio with his wife Katie and 2 sons. He grew up on his grandfather's dairy farm in Bellevue, Ohio, where they milked 85 to 100 Holsteins, Jerseys, and Brown Swiss. Josh graduated from high school in 2005 and moved to Pennsylvania to live with his uncle for 10 months to work as an apprentice trimming feet. Josh has been trimming feet for 15 years and trims over 16,000 cows each year. He has had the honor of trimming many All-American cows over the years. His passion is showing cattle. Josh owned and developed the 2017 All-American Jersey winter calf and junior champion Besley Vivitar Goblin. Josh is also the proud owner of the current first place junior 2-year-old Jersey and reserve intermediate champion of the World Dairy Expo, Des Proverts Joel Glamour, very good 89. Josh has owned and developed Glamour since she was a summer yearling. Josh's love for the dairy industry runs deep in the roots of his family. He enjoys being involved in both the show ring and the everyday care he provides for his clients. Thank you, Steph and Josh, for joining us tonight.
Excellent. Thanks, Braden. And Steph, I believe we're starting with you, so we'll turn it right over to you. As always, members, if you can put yourself on mute. If you do have a question, feel free to either raise your hand or just speak up, or you can always type it in the chat box and I can ask our speakers for you. So Steph, over to you. So I see, Steph, we must have lost her. Josh, I see you on the screen there. Are you able to start? Do you mind going first?
No, that's fine. I can go first.
Excellent. You go ahead, and when we'll go to Steph when she joins us back.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the introduction there. I guess I'm supposed to do a little bit of talking about foot trimming here. So the first part we'll go over would be, I guess, the trim schedule. And these are recommendations that I give to the different herds that I trim, whether it be the schedule, foot bath, the treatments of different lesions. These are the things that I do for the clients that I serve. Amongst hoof trimmers, there's quite a wide range of opinions. Your hoof trimmer may not think exactly like me. He may not have been taught like me, may have had different experiences, but what I'm going to share with you this evening are what I was taught, what I've learned through my 15 years of trimming feet, and what seems to work best for the clients that I have. The first thing we're going to go over would be this trim schedule that I recommend. And I recommend all of my clients to trim herds every 4 to 6 months. I don't trim for a lot of big dairy herds. And when I say big, where I'm at, the biggest herd that I trim for milks 2,500 cows. Everything else goes down from there. And a lot of my herds are in the 60 to 120 cow range. 120 cows is a good size day for me, but it's not the biggest day. And so if it's that size or smaller, we usually set up and do the whole herd at one time, all the milk cows, all the dry cows. And I also recommend them to trim the pretty fresh heifers so that when they come into the milking herd with all the stress of calving and ration change and everything else, they don't have to, hopefully they won't be having hoof problems coming onto the concrete that they may not have been on as a heifer, or you know, things like that. So I don't know that I can really recommend a certain, say, every trim it dry off 90 days, maybe 210 days fresh to every single herd, but somewhere around that is usually a pretty good time frame to get them done and keep them in good shape. So like I said, that's the schedule that I recommend to the people that I trim for. There are occasions in different barns and different setups that can get away with quite a bit less, actually. I have several flush barns that I trim for, the sand-bedded flush barns, and those guys can get away with trimming quite a bit less than someone in a tie stall barn or a barn with mattresses. A lot of the guys I trim for with flush barns trim everything once a year and really have pretty good success with not having many lame cows in between trimmings. At the big dairy I trim, and the biggest one, like I said, is 2,500. They are set on a schedule that they trim everything at dry off at 90 days fresh, and I believe it's at 210 days fresh, and then again back at dry off. Just because obviously I can't get that many done in the amount of time allotted. So the next thing would be what I found to be optimal stalls for cows. And that would be, in my opinion, the sand-bedded, deep sand-bedded stalls. Cows really seem to be comfortable. They don't spend the time just sitting around their feet. And cows' feet, like, you know, many of us know, really weren't made to stand on concrete 24 hours a day. You know, they're more adapt to the dirt. And so being on concrete, they need to have a good, comfortable place to rest as much as possible. We really want cows to be eating, then they're being milked, and resting. So eating and resting are the two things we want them to do. We don't want them standing around on concrete. And so in my opinion, and from the different studies that I've seen, which are quite a few actually, deep sand bedding is the most comfortable that we know of right now. Some things to look for in a sand bedded barn that can create problems though is coarse sand. And I've never been to Canada. I'm 34 years old. I've never been there. So I don't know what a lot of the farms up there use compared to what we have down here where I live. But the sand bedded barns are really, really coming along. And I would say probably one of the, at least in the newer operations, are probably the number one bedding. But one of the things to look for in those is as they flush and the sand settles out, they reuse that sand, the finer sand goes to the pit, which leaves us with a more coarse sand, and that can wear the feet harder, which doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to trim less, because not always do they wear in the right place at the right time to, you know, be able to skip a trimming. But excuse me, watch for the coarse sand as the sand gets older, because it'll wear the feet harder and create more problems. Some other things about stalls that I see, probably the worst setup that I trim for in farms is the mattresses in a free stall barn. They just seem to really not be the most comfortable. They require quite a bit of work to keep well bedded. And, you know, with the flushing is also a big thing as far as, you know, keeping everything clean. The hooves clean, which when they go through a foot bath, then they get a better application. And so I actually have a graph here that I'm going to show you. I use a program in my hoof trimming called Hoof Supervisor, and it's a computer, excuse me, it's a computer program that I enter each cow into at each farm. Any problem, it records at each foot. And at the end of the day, I save that, and I can go back and look at any time. I give that report to the farm at the end of the day, and we can look at it yearly, any time frame. But I'm going to show you a picture of a stall barn that has mattresses, a fruit stall barn with mattresses, and they scrape with a skid loader. Well, that whatever pen they about 400 jerseys, and every pen when it's in the parlor or the holding area, they get scraped. And I don't know, this is a graph for the year of 2020 so far. We have trimmed, let's see, how many does that say? 244 plus 322. So, and of those 566 cows, there have been 244 with a lesion. And then this graph over here shows us what those different lesions are. And digital dermatitis, or hairy warts, as you might know them, is a big, big problem here. They only scrape twice a day. For some unknown reason to me, they do not want to run a foot bath. And I am at this farm every 2 weeks, and there is quite a bit of wetness. And I think it's a lot of it is due with the ulcers that they have are just from the cows standing. They're a little bit overcrowded. They don't have the best grooving. They don't have good traction, and it's an overall bad scenario. That there is not totally uncommon for what I see in my mattress herds. Mattress barns seem to be pretty hard on cattle. If that's what you have to make the best of it, and you know, do the best job you can with what you have. I'm going to bring up another report here. Actually, I just trimmed for this guy yesterday, and I'm trying to get to this here. Give me just a second. So I just trimmed for this guy. He has deep sand bedding, a flush barn, and we trimmed 93 cows yesterday. Like I said, we do it all in one day. And of those 93 cows, 13 had a problem. Of the problems, 6 of them were digital warts in that area or in the front. Of them were interdigital dermatitis, which is warts in between claws, and the rest of them are the other issues. But 13 of the 80 does not foot bath steady. He runs a foot bath when he starts having problems. And as you can see, 13 of the 93 cows had a problem. Not ideal, but a lot different than the last farm I showed you. So those are pretty typical of what I see in the herds I trim. If a guy runs a foot bath in a flush barn or a sand bedded barn that gets, you know, scraped frequently, at the big dairy I trim, they run a foot bath 4 times a week. And they also scrape, they milk 3 times a day. They scrape each pen. Every time they milk, they scrape the alleys in between each pen. They do a very good job. And I trim about 140 cows a week there, between 100 and 140, depending on how many they're milking at the time. And I might wrap 2 or 3 warts. They do a very good job. And that foot bath, with everything being clean, that foot bath is able to do a fantastic job with keeping things in shape. That leads to kind of the next point I had, which was keeping everything clean and dry so that the cows aren't standing in deep manure. One thing that you can, that some of the, I don't have a lot of robot herds, but the ones that I do have alley scrapers. And the alley scrapers obviously relieve some work from the farmer, but it seems to be more beneficial to have those running at a more frequent basis rather than spreading it out, because the less manure that you can bring with that scraper up on the cow standing there, if that manure is deep and it coats her foot, she steps over it, it starts drying. The next time it comes through, it's another coat of manure, and you'll notice they'll start getting buildup, which then isn't good for the foot. It keeps it damp, it keeps it wet. You increase your risk of foot rot, you increase your risk of digital dermatitis. And even if you're running a foot bath, it's not able to penetrate and get a good application on the affected area. So that's something to look for with an alley scraper. Another thing you want to do to help keep the feet healthy is avoid tracking in stones. If you are scraping with a skid loader, try to make sure that you're not bringing stones in on the concrete that the cows are then going to walk on. It's a lot different for a cow to walk on some stone out in the pasture or on the way to the pasture as opposed to walking on a stone that's on concrete. It can bruise the sole, it can cause hemorrhaging, cause sole ulcer, which is obviously not going to help with our goal of zero lameness. So the fourth thing, which is kind of coming to the end of the things I have to say, and if you have some questions after this, I'll do my best to answer them, is I'm not a dairy nutritionist. So I don't have, I wish I did have, but I don't have the knowledge base to be able to say, this cow's starch is too high, the ration is too high in starch, and this is happening or that's happening, too much energy, whatever. But I know that having a balanced ration is very, very important to keeping your feet healthy. And not just a balanced ration for the milk cows, but a balanced ration for the pre-fresh heifers, for the dry cows, for the transition pen, for every stage. The easier you can make that transition for the cow, the easier it will be on her feet. If you trim pre-fresh heifers and they don't have overgrowth and they're not going to be getting, sole hemorrhaging and sole ulcers from overgrowth coming from a pen pack to a concrete, if you can eliminate as many potential hazards as you can, you're more likely to be able to have a good lameness-free lactation for that animal. As a hoof trimmer, I find it very, very valuable to have a good relationship with the vet of the dairy, with the nutritionist of the dairy, and not try to be, I don't want to ever come across to them as someone who's in competition with, or trying to make them look bad, or trying to create conflict in any way. We're supposed to all be working together for you, the dairy farmer, to help make things go as smoothly and efficiently and as well as possible. Thankfully, I have a good relationship with, as far as I know, a good relationship with all the vets around me. I've had several of them do work for myself. And, if I have a cow that somebody calls and they want me to work on and I'm unable to do what they call surgery, remove a claw or something major like that, I can get a hold of the vet and we'll meet up at the farm and get her taken care of the best we can. But I guess that kind of wraps up some of the things that I have on my list here to talk about. If you have some questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. Why don't we do questions for Josh right now? So if you have a question, go ahead and unmute your mic and you can ask him directly or type it in the chat box and I can ask him for you. So question, Josh here, how do you trim hooves? Can you give us a little rundown of your method?
How do I trim hoofs? I can take that a couple different ways. I trim hooves with a layover chute that lays the cow onto the right side. It's called a Tuffy tilt table. It's made in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is really close to where I learned how to trim feet. It lays them over. It has a the one side of the chute is on a pivot, and it kind of goes under them, squeezes in and goes under like a cradle kind of, takes them over. And mine has hydraulic leg latches, which hold each foot while I trim it. And I trim with a Bosch 4.5-inch grinder with a Trim Tech titanium trimming wheel. It has 6 carbide tips in it, and that's what I use to trim feet. If you're asking how I trim feet to as far as what method do I use, whether I use the Dutch method or the Kansas method, I don't trim by a certain method. I trim more of a, I don't want to get myself in hot water. Any other trimmers that might be watching. I don't trim with a certain method. Depending on what the cows are walking on and where they live and what they're doing, I will tweak a little bit one way or the other. If I'm trimming a cow who is on pasture, she's going to get trimmed a little more different.
You might have to turn your TV up.
But hopefully that answers your question.
All right, got quite a few more questions coming in here. Let's see. What is the best foot bath to use?
The best foot bath, in my opinion, is a foot bath that is run. A foot bath that is not left in the barrel. A foot bath that isn't run when there's a bad outbreak. Consistency is the most important ingredient. A foot bath should be long and it should be narrow. You don't want the cow to be able to miss a foot dunking in the solution. And if she has a bad foot, she's not going to want to get it in there. You have to have it long enough. She has to get at least one dunk on all feet. So long and narrow, and you want a low pH to start off. You don't want it, you don't want to start with a 5 or 6 pH. By the time you get 10, 15 cows through it, it's already going to be, used up beyond really having a significant change. As far as the best product that I have found in my herds is a product called Ultra 2-in-1 from Agrichem out of New York. That's what I recommend to my people. The only problem with that is it does have some formaldehyde in it, which is bad news. You really don't want to you don't want to have to handle and breathe that very much, but it's a very, very effective foot bath solution.
Okay. Next question for you, Josh, is what surgeries or operations can you do on a calf's hoof without a vet?
At least here in the US, I am not allowed, to the best of my knowledge, to do any surgeries or amputations.
Okay. This is an interesting question. Why do cows need dew claws?
They don't anymore. There's actually some herds that I trim for that have cows that have at least the inside rear dew claw removed. I don't know if they remove that at birth with like a dehorning paste or what. I'm not sure, but I've trimmed, cows that are missing at least the inside dew claw on the rear feet, which I assume is to, help protect the udder. But if a cow has really long dew claws, then I usually just take my grinder and try to trim them down to the point where, they're not a hazard.
Okay. And how did you get into hoof trimming?
Well, I always thought the hoof trimmer was, I loved watching them at my grandpa's farm. And when my grandpa sold out, my uncle then moved to Pennsylvania and started trimming feet. And so whenever we'd go on vacation out there, I'd always go with him. I liked it. And before I graduated, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I moved out with him and learned how to do it.
Excellent. Do cows need sedation generally when you're trimming hooves?
No, not if you're able to get them in the chute. In my chute, they don't need sedated. My chute is lined with 2 inches of like rubber foam on every part that touches the cow. The headrest, where they lay, the part that squeezes in, the leg latches, everything is rubber. So even if a cow is thrashing and fighting, which they normally don't do very much, just because as the chute closes in on them, they seem to, I don't want to say they feel secure, but they're not like just out in limbo, and they really don't usually fight very often at all. The only time I ever have to have anything sedated is if it's like a humongous beef bull that we can't get, to go in the chute, and we have to lay him down or do something like that. That's the only time I ever have anything sedated.
Okay. And have you ever trimmed a cow while it was standing?
Not very often. The only time I ever trim them when they're standing is if maybe there's a cow that a farmer has that is so bad he doesn't want a chance getting her out of the stall if it's a tie stall, or doesn't think she'll make it to the chute. I'll go and I'll pick up her bad foot and see what I can do. But I don't do a lot of trimming standing up unless it's a little calf for a show or something like that.
Okay. And how long does it take you to do one cow in the chute? And also, how long would it take you to do your largest farm?
It depends how long in the chute, but I would say on average, probably about 3 minutes. The most cows I've ever done in an hour is 37 cows. I've done 37 cows in an hour, but that's not an average. And I would say I average probably between 10 and 14 cows an hour. So somewhere between 4 minutes, probably 3 or 5 minutes.
I'm not sure we could keep up with you, Josh. Next question for you. Can feed cause cattle feet quicker than normal?
Could you say that again?
Can feed cause cattle feet to grow quicker than normal?
Yes, they absolutely can. And again, I'm not a nutritionist to be able to say what is making it grow more than normal. I do know that if, say, a cow gets out and goes to the feed room and slug feeds a bunch of supplement or something she's not supposed to, chances are pretty good that she's going to get some sort of problem, whether it be an ulcer or stool hemorrhage or something that's going to be a problem. She could founder, she could get laminitis. Yes, feed has a big role in feet and in the length it grows.
Okay. Do cows have frogs like horses do?
No, they don't.
Okay, that was an easy answer. Here's a question for you. So this is a vet club, so lots of people interested in thinking about that as a future career. Does trimming hurt the cow?
Trimming should not hurt the cow. If that's a tricky question. Trimming should not hurt the cow. A cow shouldn't come out of the chute more lame than when she went in the chute, obviously. I'm not going to say there's never any pain involved, because we see a cow limping with a hairy wart, we know it hurts. Then we put something on that which kills the bacteria living in the skin, or at least tries to kill it, and that's going to burn. So I'm not going to say they never feel any discomfort, but they shouldn't feel unnecessary discomfort.
Okay, great answer. What is the difference between the Dutch and the Kansas methods?
Simply, the Kansas method leaves a foot more flat on the bottom, where a Dutch method will have some modeling. That's my understanding.
Okay. Here's a great question, and maybe you can answer from your US perspective, but do you need a permit or license to hoof trim?
Not in the US. But I will say, you don't need a piece of paper that says you can do it. If you can't do it, farmers will soon find out and you will not be busy. It's not an occupation you can hide in. You can't talk the talk if you can't walk the walk, because it's just not something you can hide.
That's good advice. Next question is, what is the advantage of your flip chute versus the kind where the cow stays standing upright?
The advantage for me is, the advantages I see, I've never trimmed on an upright chute, so I'm not going to pick them apart, and I'm not going to say I'll never have one. There's some out there that I think are really, really nice. And both layover chutes and upright chutes have come a long ways in the last, I'm going to say 10 years. And for me, I learned on a layover chute. So it's what I know. It's what I'm most comfortable with. I like my layover chute because I have access to all 4 feet at one time. I don't have to pick up each foot at a different time. Those are the 2 main reasons that I like my layover chute. And the number one is, it's what I learned on. It's what I know. That's the biggest advantage for me right now. Like I said, both layover and upright make some really, really great chutes. But for me, those are the reasons why I like what I have right now.
Okay. There's a question about wrapping. So what does the wrapping do for the hoof?
The wrapping, I don't do a lot of wrapping. What wrapping for me is supposed to do, a wrap is supposed to hold a treatment on the affected spot. So if there's a wart on the heel, a heel wart, then the wrap is just gonna hold that treatment right on that spot. I don't want the wrap to stay on. I tell all of my farmers, don't leave that wrap on more than 3 days. It doesn't need to be on 3 days, in my opinion, but don't leave it on longer than 3 days. All the wrap is doing is holding the treatment in place.
Okay. And the last question I have here, so members, if you have others, please type them in now or get ready to ask them. The last question I have is there a blood vein in the hoof?
There are lots, I would assume, lots of veins that carry blood in the hoof. Yes. It's, let me rephrase that. I feel like someone might be trying to trick me. It's not in the hoof. It's inside the hoof. The hoof is what we trim. We think of the hoof as the hard part, kind of like your fingernail. There's no blood in the hoof, but underneath the hoof, there's lots of blood.
Okay. Last chance for questions for Josh. Anybody have anything else they want to ask?
I saw a question pop up and someone asked why the dew claws aren't needed. I don't have a scientific reason for that, but I know that the cows that have no dew claws that I trim get along just fine. Maybe if a cow was walking on super steep hills and mountains, maybe she would need some dew claws for traction. I don't know for sure, but in my opinion, the average dairy cow today does not need dew claws.
All right. Thanks for answering that as well, Josh. I don't see any other questions at the moment. Maybe I'll just do a quick check if Steph has been able to rejoin us. Steph, are you online?
I am. Just 1 second. Where are we here? Can you hear me?
We can.
Yay, there we go. Perfect. Cool. Yes, I am back on. I'm on cell data now since our internet is down with the storm, as per usual. So I am going to talk to you guys today about raising calves and heifers. So I didn't grow up on a dairy farm, just as a little background. I actually grew up on a hog farm. So I met my husband at university, and I was actually working as an equine nutritionist at the time. So with dairy, it's kind of all encompassing. So I figured I'd better figure out if I could hack it if I was going to marry him. So I learned to milk cows in Guelph at Mid Valley Farms. So I was milking a couple mornings a week before school and before work, and then a couple nights a week as their night milker. After that, I ended up working for Stanton Farms for 6 years as their herdsman. So I got to learn a lot of cool stuff there. They're a leading genomic herd. They're milking about 1,000 cows. So it was an awesome 6 years. They're really, really cool guys. So what I'm going to try and do now is see if my internet will cooperate to screen share this with you guys. Let's see. All right. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we sure can.
Yay, perfect. All right, so the biggest thing for us is that you can't manage what you don't measure. So listening to Josh talk about hoof trimming, obviously that's so important. But again, if you listen to the statistics that he had, one of the most important things you can do for any aspect on the dairy is manage. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So it's okay to think you're doing all right. If you're doing an okay job, that's fine. But are you actually? So it's really important to take some parameters and benchmark yourself. So see what you're doing and how you're doing, and then try and do better. So a little bit about us. We're Max Villa Farms. We're milking 120 cows in a rotary parlor right now. We have a freestyle barn, Josh's least favorite, with mattresses and a little bit of sawdust. But again, it's one of those things where we make the best of what we've got. We also cash crop about 1,200 acres. I manage all of our health stuff in our dairy. We do have a herdsman and a part-time employee, as well as we have a high school student this summer who's going to Ridgetown College in the fall, and she is all kinds of awesome. So we have new calves facilities that we built in 2016. It's all in, all out, 2 separate sides. I'll show you guys some pictures of it in a minute. We really focused on biosecurity and ventilation when we built this barn. Coming from a hog background, biosecurity is really, really important to me, as is all in, all out. I want to be able to pressure wash down everything completely and sanitize and sterilize in between our calf crops. So prior to building this barn, we actually raised all of our calves upstairs in the hayloft of the old barn. So that posed a ton of challenges with mortality, morbidity, and with growth. So when we started to look at where the bottlenecks may be in our own operation, we realized we were buying in a number of replacement cows each year. So we went back through the herd and looked at why this was happening. So we had higher than normal mortality rates, and we were treating a lot of calves, and obviously we weren't getting them bred as early as we should because they weren't growing as well as they should. So our facilities were a major, major challenge. There wasn't a lot of ventilation. There's very poor drainage, obviously upstairs in a hayloft. We had a combination of wooden pens and plastic pens, just kind of a mismatch of everything. So, you know, you kind of look at that and you go, well, whatever, I can't do better. But the truth is, so what? So what if you don't have great facilities? So what if you don't have the best of everything? It's your job to make it the best you can. So even though we were struggling with old facilities and some disease challenges, it was up to us to figure out, how do we make the best of what we've got? How can we improve what we have? Because even if we turned around and built that new barn, a new barn isn't going to survive poor management. Your problems will follow you. If you don't correct the management first, there's absolutely no point in trying to build new, because a new build might take care of some of your issues. It might have taken care of our ventilation and our drainage, but it wasn't going to make up for our shortfalls in our management. So we really had to take a look at what we were doing and kind of work to turn things around. So whenever you're looking at anything on the dairy, whether it be calves, milking, hoof trimming, you need to do better what you have. So for us, I would love to have a sand freestyle barn, for example, but it's just not going to happen. So we need to work with our mattresses and our hoof trimmer like Josh to make the best of what we can do. And the same is true of our calves. So we identified our starting point. We looked at accurate numbers of how many calves we were treating, how many calves we were losing, and our growth. So how much average daily gain we were getting in return for the feed that we were putting in. So we chose to measure as much as we could. We worked with our veterinarian, we worked with our feed rep to determine what parameters we were going to set and what we were going to measure. So the first thing that we did was you need a starting point. You need to take a really good, honest look at where you are. And you know what? You might be doing awesome. You might be doing really, really well in 9 out of 10 places, but that doesn't mean you can't improve that 10th place. So measure everything that you can and then utilize your team. So we worked with our veterinarian, our feed nutritionist. We actually had a ventilation expert come in as well. We did a lot of testing. So before treating pneumonia calves and just saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to give them a shot of Nuflor, we took nasal swabs. That way we could figure out what we were actually battling instead of just treating for the sake of treating. So we worked really hard to figure out kind of what our biggest problems were. So for us, crypto was a really big issue. Cleaning upstairs in an old bank barn is really difficult. You can't pressure wash it. It's difficult to sanitize. So that was one of our leading causes that were coming back in our fecal samples. So with that, we knew that we needed to do a lot more supportive care. So we worked with our veterinarian to determine a treatment plan that involved learning a couple new skill sets. For me, that was learning how to IV a calf and hooking up actually bags of fluid so that we could rehydrate them. And then that way we weren't relying on antibiotics. For those of you that know, crypto is not really something you can treat with antibiotics. It's all supportive care to get them through it. So with that, we made a plan and we stuck to it. So the biggest thing to remember when you are looking at your own operation and giving a really good honest look at it is that what works best for you isn't necessarily going to work best for your neighbor. So for example, I have a neighbor that does an amazing job raising calves and hutches. Like they do amazing. Their average daily gain is fantastic. They have almost no mortality, almost no morbidity. I don't manage hutches well. I don't like winter. I don't like the cold. And so I tend to look over things that I shouldn't. So you have to do what works for your management style and what works for your herd. So the vaccinations that I use on my herd might not be appropriate for what your herd is. So it's all case by case and it's very, very individual. And that's something that's so cool about dairy farming is that there are so many ways to get awesome results doing it the way that you want to and the way that makes sense for you. So with our farm, we started by making small changes. A lot of times, the smallest changes can have some seriously big impacts. So for us, we went to buying a colostrum bucket that was exclusively for colostrum. Only fresh cow colostrum went in there. It got rinsed out, sanitized with bleach, and set out to dry before the next milking. We never put a treated cow in that bucket. It is stainless steel. Like I said, it gets washed down and disinfected in between each feeding. And that way we know there's as little contamination as possible. The other thing that we started doing was testing our colostrum. So on the screen here, you'll see a Brix refractometer. They're really cheap. They're less than 50 bucks, and they can make a really big difference in what you're doing. So if you're guaranteeing that you're always feeding high quality colostrum, what you do is you take a little bit of colostrum. It works better if you cool it down first. Put it on the screen, close it, and then you actually look through it, and it will give you a measure of how good that colostrum is by measuring the IgGs in it. So what that does is it can tell you if it's good quality colostrum or poor quality colostrum. So what that is a measure of the antibodies that are going to go through to that calf. So for us, when we started testing, we realized that our heifers consistently had low quality colostrum and our older cows had a bit better colostrum. So what that allowed us to do was go back and look at our heifer vaccination program and compare it to our cow vaccination program. And we realized that our heifers were really light on vaccinations, and that was showing through to their colostrum. So that was a major change that we were able to make. And so for the time being, what we did was we didn't feed any heifer colostrum. We actually only fed colostrum from older cows, and we froze. So if we had heifers calve in, we could feed high quality colostrum to all of our calves within 4 hours of them calving. The next picture you'll see here is a tuber. So this isn't for everybody. It's again a matter of preference. For us to be able to get those 4 liters of colostrum in the first 4 to 6 hours, I find that tubing works better for our particular situation. Again, I have lots of friends that bottle feed their 4 liters and it works great for them. It doesn't matter how the calf gets the colostrum as long as they get the colostrum. So that was another change that we made that made sense for our farm. The next was that we changed our cleaning protocols. So we went to sanitizing all of our buckets. We actually bought 2 sets so that we could wash them in sunlight detergent, rinse them in bleach, and then set them out to dry before the next feeding. We also switched to buckets from bottles because we were finding that we weren't able to get the volume of milk into our calves as quickly as possible. So we found that for us, buckets were a choice. They were easier to clean and easier to make sure that they got sanitized. I was working a full-time job at the time and feeding calves, so time was a little bit of the essence for us. Working with our vet, we were able to introduce a couple new vaccinations based on the test results that we got back from our nasal swabs. And then we actually decided to start vaccinating our dry cows with ScourGuard 4KC to help with some of our scouring that we were seeing in our newborn calves. And we found that that actually worked better than the Calf Guard, which is a similar product, but you give calves. So that worked great for us. And then we started weighing everything at birth and again at weaning so that we had an idea of where we were sitting for our average daily gain and what kind of growth we were getting. So those are all really, really inexpensive changes, relatively speaking, to make. And we didn't do them all at once. We would start with one thing, and when that didn't feel overwhelming anymore, when it felt like it was part of our system, then we would go on and make another change. So we did that for several years, and we were able to drastically drop our mortality and our morbidity. We ended up not having to buy in replacement cows anymore, which meant that we had more income year over year because we weren't spending that money on replacements, which actually allowed us to go through and build a new barn. So during all of this, we were still struggling with our facilities. The environment wasn't great. We did do some ventilation changes. So we put in a homemade tube with the help of our veterinarian and some ventilation assistance. And then I learned a couple new skill sets, including IVing calves, as I mentioned. So see here if this video is open. So I did actually IV a beef calf yesterday to show you guys how we do it here, but it is not uploading. So what I'm going to do is I will send the video to Brianne so that it will be available to you guys. But right now, we'll see if I can open this one, which is a good video as well. And what it is it involves putting a catheter right into the jugular vein of the calf and sewing it in. So we'll see, can you guys see this screen here? Let me see if I can, let's see, new share. Let's flip over to this one. Can everybody see the calf flying down on this one? That's screen sharing properly.
There we go.
Yeah.
Just came up.
Perfect. Yay. All right. So we'll watch this. It's a similar process to what we use. Typically with Holstein calves, I don't have to shave them to find their jugular. But with beef calves, I do because they tend to have a bit more hair because they're living outside. So we'll just watch a little bit of a clip here. It'll show you how to find the jugular vein, and she's going to insert a catheter. So with the catheter, there's basically a long needle on the inside and it's a plastic sheath. So once you find the vein, you actually slide the plastic sheath in, and then you can sew it in place so that the calf can't rip it out. The reason we use this vein is because it's really difficult for the calf to actually get it out once it's in. So I will put the catheter in, I sew it, I believe in this video it actually tapes it, and then I sew again behind the ear. And then that way it keeps it out of the way of their feet. And I'm glad I'm showing you guys this video instead of the one I took because I maybe skipped that part. So if you see here, this right here is a needle and it's covered by the plastic sheathing that I was talking about. And up here, we're going to see it fill with blood. And that's how you know that you are in the vein. Most of the time you can do it by feel as well, but the flash is a good reminder of where you are. So see there, she pulls the needle out a little bit and advances the catheter in. That way you're not going through the vein and the catheter is actually sliding into place. So I would venture a guess that actually right here, she's not completely in because you should have blood flow dripping there, but it gives you a good idea of the process. And then we'll just watch her as she attaches the line and sews it in, and then we'll flip back. So she tapes it. I have taped them in the past. I find that sewing them in works a little bit better. So the way that it works is I purchase pre-threaded catheters from our veterinarian. So it's actually a needle that has a little stitch all the way through it. So you just stick it in like a normal needle, pull it out, and then you can just actually sew it in. So the reason that I learned how to do this was that we were struggling a lot with crypto and dehydration in our calves, and we weren't getting enough into them in terms of electrolytes. So our veterinarian actually showed me how to do this. And for us, where we are, call to get a calf hooked up is just shy of $500. If I do it myself, it's about $70 in supplies. So quite a bit cheaper, quite a bit more cost effective. And it's a really, really quick way to rehydrate calves. So this would actually get hooked up to an IV line, just like you would get in the hospital. And we purchased 5-liter saline bags. So it's a really easy way and a really good skill to have, especially when you're raising large number of calves. Go back here. I think it's flipped over now. So where we are now, we built a new barn in 2016. We're now averaging about 2.7 pounds of gain per day during the first 70 days. So that's our period that they're on milk. We're less than a 1.5 mortality rate right now and less than 5% morbidity. So we're a little bit higher in morbidity since we decided to custom raise heifers for another facility. So we are commingling. So we are actually mingling the calves that we are raising along with our own. This is a picture of our facility here. So it's negative pressure ventilation. So these are our little baffles here. These guys that are hanging down right here, those are our humidity and our temperature sensors. So these baffles work on our humidity and temperature sensor. They'll open up, and these fans along the far wall will kick open and actually pull air down the calves and out. These bags right here run full time, even in negative 30-degree weather. They're a way to get fresh air into the calves. And we spent a lot of time and a lot of money investing in the ventilation for these barns. So the way that it works is these plastic pens here, they're really, really lightweight. They're really simple for me to pick up and move and pressure wash. What we do when we're starting a pen, so in this picture here, this pen would just be started. We start them in these little pens for the first 5 to 7 days. Once they're drinking well off holders themselves, then we move them into these group pens where they are on the robot. They have access ad lib, so that means they can drink basically whatever they want. They can get up to 2.5 liters every 2 hours. And then they live in that group until there's about 15 to 20 of them, depending on how our calving schedule and how full we are. Once we have the right number of calves in, these pens actually collapse down. The pen opens up, and you can see here, this pen is a full open pen. So these calves will stay together in the same group from the time that they're born, straight through weaning and straight through into breeding. So then once both these sides are open, we have the identical version of this on the other side, completely separate air systems. So it's an all in, all out system. So it means that when these calves get weaned, they move out together. Then we clean out these pens and pressure wash in between. And usually they're on milk for between 65 and 70 days. And then they go into our weaning barn. So the advantage of doing a barn like this is that if we have a disease outbreak, I can completely shut down this barn. I don't have to add any more calves to this side, and I can move on to the other side and break the cycle. So we've only had to do that once in the last 4 years, and it resolved itself pretty quickly, which was nice. So one thing about this barn is that it was a relatively big capital investment, and because of the size we were underutilizing it. So an opportunity came up with our feed representative. He had another herd that was playing with the idea of having someone else do some custom raising for their calves and heifers. They were running out of heifer facility space. So we decided that that was something that we were going to do. We were getting pretty good growth and really loving the robots and dealing well with them. So we decided that was something that we would go on. So we had to actually look to the States for a lot of advice and kind of direction on custom heifer raising. There are a lot of herds in Canada that will do some heifer raising for older calves, older heifers and kind of breeding age or pregnant heifers, but there really wasn't much in terms of calves. So we looked to the States for different types of agreements that you can do. So you can do a daily fee where the producer that you're raising for pays you daily, basically rent for that animal. Or you can do what we chose to do, where we actually purchase the animals from the other farm. They become ours, and then we sell them back once they're pregnant. So the reason that we did that is we just didn't want to have to mess around with management decisions and deciding how much to spend on which treatments and everything like that. They become part of our farm, our calves, and then we sell them back when they reach a certain age. So obviously, if you consider doing it, different arrangements work better for different circumstances. Do your research, speak to a bunch of different farms that had done it, and know your costs and your strengths. So we did a ton of research on what it typically costs people to raise calves. We did a lot of looking at our own numbers and seeing if it was feasible, and then coming to an agreement on what worked for the other farm as well as us. So with custom raising, like I said, we bring the calves in, they get commingled with ours. So we do a really good job of processing calves on arrival. We do a thorough examination, so a wellness check, and then we put blood for passive transfer testing, and we weigh for our initial weigh-in. So I'm going to switch over to this one. Let's try this one. One second, sorry guys. Let's try this one. All right, so this is a video of what happens when we receive calves and my little calf kit. If it'll play. All right, so that's the first one. So we always pull blood on arrival. We pull blood on our own calves at between 3 and 7 days as well. And the reason that we do that is we actually spin the blood down and then we test the blood serum for IgG, so immunoglobulins. In the first 7 days of a calf's life, most of the protein that's in her blood is actually maternal. So it comes from colostrum. So it's a good measure of if you're getting quality colostrum in on time. So this is the close-up of the kit. So we've got test tube here, double-ended needle, and a sleeve. Super simple, really easy to do. The first couple times you try it, it's not great, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Then I have a weight tape here. We actually have an electronic scale as well, but we built that one for about 600 bucks. This works just as well to measure changes. So if you're measuring them regularly and it's the same person measuring, you're going to get a pretty good indication of how much that calf is changing day over day. And then lastly, just a thermometer. So we take temperatures on everything as well, check navels, check gums, just an overall wellness check to make sure that the calf is feeling all right, especially because these guys they're usually around 7 days, but some come in as young as 4 days old and some are a bit older. The trailering can be really tough on them, especially in really hot weather. Let's see here. This one, there we go. So every calf that comes in gets the same process. All right, and I think, let me see if we can see any other ones. Oop. You guys can see my whole Facebook feed. Awesome. For some reason, because we have a fun storm here today, my videos didn't upload the way that they should have. So we'll go back to this one here. And there should be another video. Where did it go? Apologize, guys. Normally I'm a lot more organized than this. This has been a bit of a crazy day. This is what I'm looking for. All right, so after we pull blood at our place, we actually use a centrifuge. So this is my centrifuge in behind. And all that I do is put it in and turn it on, and it spins really fast. And what it does is it separates the blood from the plasma. So before I had this, I actually just let it sit out. So if you let blood in a test tube sit for about 24 hours, you'll get the same result, and it works just as well. This is just a lot faster. Because we're doing so many calves a week, we decided to make the investment so that it was just a one-step process instead of having to wait 24 hours to get our results. But if you wanted to do this at home, absolutely, you can just let it sit. And then I actually use the Brix refractometer. So you take this clear stuff here, which is the serum, put it on the Brix refractometer, same as you would colostrum. And when you look through it, you'll see a scale like this. So with colostrum, we're looking for 22 or higher for good quality colostrum. With IgGs for testing blood serum for passive transfer, we're looking really for anything over 10 is acceptable. So the reason that we do that is it gives us a really good indication of if that calf has had colostrum on time, and it's a good indication of the calves that are going to be a problem going forward. So we do all of the same stuff on our own calf. We typically use Enforce 3 once PMH, and then we vaccinate dry cows. So those are the three main things that our calves get. And then we do a lot of testing and monitoring. For our situation in particular, prevention is a lot less expensive than treatment is. So that's our own personal philosophy. I know lots of herds that are closed herds that operate on the premise that they'll treat what comes up. And that's fine too. For us, this just seems to work better. So that's kind of where we got where we are and what we're up to now. I will say that when you're custom raising heifers and calves, aligning producers with similar vision, goals, and expectations is pretty critical. You don't want someone that you are not going to work well with. You definitely need to have open lines of communication. So if they're having problems with their dry cows on the calf end, they need to be transparent about that, which our farm that we work with is. And same with us, if we're having problems with the calves, we need to be transparent with them as well so that they know that there may be a shortage in the stock that they're getting back. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. That's how we manage our calves on our farm, and what works for us. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but that's kind of what I've got. And I apologize for being a little short on those videos, guys. I will make sure that they get to Brianne and they get posted.
So thanks, Steph. That was really interesting. We do have a few questions that have come in. The first one, I think you mentioned right at the beginning of your presentation about, I think you said you worked in some hog farms and then maybe some equine. And so someone's wondering why you made the switch over to cows or dairy cows.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up on a farrow to finish hog farm. And then I actually evented. So I rode all through the US and Canada competing when I was quite a bit younger and a lot more fit. And then when I went to school, I went to the University of Guelph. I ended up taking agricultural business. And I got a job working for Agri-Brands Purina as an equine nutritionist. And then from there, when I met my husband and started dating him, I figured out I better figure out if I could hack it on a dairy farm long term. So once I got learning about milking cows and all of the science behind it and all of the different things that you can do and the different ways that you can be successful, there's no one right way. It really complemented everything that I already knew about animal husbandry, and it had a lot more opportunity advance than maybe something in the equine industry did. And for me personally, I like the working environment a little bit better than the hog barn. It's nice to be outside. It's nice to have that interaction. There's more interaction with people and suppliers and all of that than you get in the hog world, just because biosecurity has to be so tight because they're so predisposed to disease. So yeah, I started milking, and then I got offered a herdsman job with Stanton Farms, and it was pretty awesome. They're pretty great guys. So yeah.
Awesome. What a great history. The next question for you, Steph, is around the cost of raising a calf. What does it cost to raise a heifer from newborn to calving?
Yeah, so for us in feed costs, so it'll be different on operation to operation. It'll depend on whether you are using whole milk or milk replacer. Right now we're using mostly milk replacer, but we are looking at implementing a whole milk system. So we're hoping to have that up and running in the next year. And then what you choose to supplement with. So what type of calf starter you're using. So for us in feed costs alone, from newborn to 13 months is about $900 just in feed costs. And then if you add in your bedding costs, your labor, electricity, that kind of stuff, you're probably around that $1,200 mark.
Okay. The next question is, what is the average temperature for a calf?
On our farm, the average temperature is, I'm happy with anything below like 100.1. For the guys coming off the trailer, that was one of the learning curves for us. Everything was coming in with fevers after shipping, but because they are contained in a trailer, they get excited, they get a little bit nervous. That will drive their temperature up. So we made a plan with our vet, and we actually don't check them until 4 to 5 hours after they arrive, once they've had a chance to settle in.
That's a great strategy. Next question for you. How long before you turn them back to the original farmer?
So our agreement is that they go back at 60 days bred. So once they're confirmed in calf, then they will go back. So that depends a little bit on the animal. So is she big enough to be bred? Is she fit enough to be bred? Is she the right condition? Is she cycling properly? So our aim is to get them back to him about 13 to 14 months old, but you're going to have calves that go back a little bit earlier and calves that go back a little bit later, just depending on that individual animal. But our aim is around that 13 to 14 month mark.
Okay. The next question is, if the IgGs are low in the blood, what treatment would you use?
So we have tried supplementing. There is what is it called? Aminulene that we have tried supplementing that's supposed to give them an immune boost, but we really didn't see a whole lot of benefit from that. Basically, it's more a measure of how things are going on the farm overall than it is of what to do with that individual calf. So it's a trend on and a measure of how the herd is getting colostrum. How is it getting enough colostrum? Is the quality high enough? Is it getting it in a timely manner? So with that individual calf, we put her on what we call a watch list. And then that way we know that, okay, yep, she tested negative for IgGs or low for IgGs. So then we know that if she looks even a little bit off, or if her drinking speed decreases a little bit, or if she's not drinking as aggressively as she should, then she might require more intervention. We might have our vet look at her. We might try and run a couple tests on her. But basically, she just comes up on my watch list that I need to keep a closer eye on her, because I can't treat something she doesn't have yet. It just means she's more susceptible to it.
Okay. The next couple of comments are about your time at Guelph. So lots of support from some of your fellow Aggies who are members from across the province. Maybe can you just tell us when you graduated and maybe a little bit about your experience at Guelph?
Sure. So I am a 2010, go Bucks. A long time ago. I'm old now, just sad. But yeah, no, Guelph was awesome. I actually went in and I did my first 2 years of biomedical sciences. And then I figured out really quickly I didn't want to be a doctor. So I looked at different avenues that I could pursue that would facilitate having a career in rural Ontario, and came across agricultural business. So it seemed like a good fit. We had a lot of fun, a lot of good pub nights. It was awesome.
All right, great answer. Next question is, what milk replacer are you using?
So we are feeding with Suregain. So we are using a Suregain product. Yeah, it's not the top of the line, but it's not the bottom of the barrel either.
Okay. What is your newborn calf vaccine program?
Sure. So with our own calves that are born on farm, we remove them as soon as we can, and they get colostrum within the first 4 hours. Whether or not that is maternal colostrum or thawed colostrum kind of depends on when they calve. Because we have the rotary parlor, it's a really big pain to start up the parlor for just one cow. So that is something in the future we will have to look at doing, and getting a portable milker. But right now we are getting by on frozen colostrum when we need it. So when they come in, they get their navel dipped with iodine, they get Ceylani in the muscle, so 1 cc Ceylani in the muscle, and then they get Enforce 3 and Enforce 3 up the nose, as well as once PMH up the nose. So we struggled a little bit with pneumonia, and so we did a bunch of nasal swabs, and based on cultures, those were the 2 that would be most effective against the strain that we were fighting. As I mentioned previously, our cows are vaccinated with Scour Guard, so that gives us a little bit of protection there as well. We were using Calf Guard until we got onto a regular dry cow vaccination protocol. So yeah, so they get that, and then at weaning, they get a repeat of once PMH and Enforce 3 before they move to our other barn, just to give them a little bit bumped up protection that way during their stressful weaning period. And then at 4 months old, they get a Bovishield shot and a booster, and then they get another booster of Bovishield again right before breeding, about 30 days before we breed.
Awesome. A few questions about your dairy operations. So can you tell us a little bit more about the operation? And one specific question is, how many stalls in your rotary parlor?
Sure. So we have the rotary parlor. It's 24 stalls. It was one of the first rotaries that was built in Canada. So it's about 16 years old now. So it's a bit older. It offers some advantages for sure. We milk with one person in the parlor. Typically, it's occasionally 2, but usually 1 with one person pushing cows. And then, as I said before, we have a freestall barn with mattresses that are bedded with sawdust, or right now we're actually using chopped corn stalks. And I'm pretty sure that Josh is just cringing over there.
He said you make work whatever you can, whatever you have.
That's right. And we trim every 2 weeks, so we're good.
Perfect. Any other questions for Steph? Anyone, you feel free to turn yourself off mute and ask her directly or type it into the chat box.
So I've got, how many times does a healthy calf have to see the vet? If we have, it's rare. It's very rare that I have a vet see a calf. So we kind of truck along, and if they're healthy, they won't see a vet until maybe breeding age. And then if she gets pregnant right away, probably not then. Our goal is to have animals never have to see the vet. That being said, if I have an issue, I will call the vet, obviously. But most things, our veterinary service is fantastic at teaching farmers to be self-reliant and to be able to do the majority of things themselves. So anything that I would call a vet for in the calf, I can pretty much do myself. That being said, if it's something I haven't seen regularly, or if I'm not sure, I can always call and do a phone consult. But it's very rare that I actually need a vet to check on our calves. If I'm having issues, say I've treated more than one calf for pneumonia in a 2-week period, that would be a sign to me that something's maybe not right. And what I would do at that point, I always keep nasal swabs on hand. I would take the nasal swabs myself and take them into the clinic. When you're raising calves, and especially when you're doing some custom raising, you want to make sure that you are doing everything that you can to keep your expenses down. And obviously, you're not doing that at the expense of the animal. We would never do that, because the animal is our ultimate goal. We want to keep them as healthy and comfortable as possible. But the end goal is to do as much on farm as you can. And then, yeah.
Excellent. What an, sounds like quite an interesting operation. Any last questions for Steph? All right, Steph, I don't see any other ones coming in. Any last parting words that you wanted to share with us? Oh, there is one question before you do that. Maybe, have you considered the powdered colostrum?
Have I considered powdered colostrum? So, I am not going to bash powdered colostrum because it has a fit in some places, but we have had notoriously horrendous luck with powdered colostrum. It doesn't work very well for us. We've tried a couple different brands. The best brand that we have used is the Grober powdered colostrum, but we just found that the calves weren't performing as well as they did on maternal colostrum or on frozen colostrum. The other issue with powdered colostrum is because we rely so heavily on IgG testing, because the concentration of fat and protein is different in powdered colostrum. It's not actually accurate. So I should have mentioned that before. That blood test for blood serum and testing the IgG levels is not accurate in a calf that has been fed milk or powdered colostrum replacer. So for our farm in particular, we have really high quality colostrum. We send a sample kind of once a month with our vet just to check for different bacteria levels and that kind of thing. And then we test all of the time for protein levels. We find we have really good luck, and for the amount of effort it takes for us to freeze a couple bags, we have a freezer right in the calf barn, and it doesn't take that long to thaw it. We find that that works better for us.
Excellent. So I don't see any more questions this time. So over to you for parting words.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, guys, for having me. It's been awesome. The fact that you guys are all on this call and are interested in dairy science and making yourselves better is fantastic to see. And if you do have things that you want to change or improve on your operation, know that the solution isn't always just building something new. A lot of times it works just as well to work with what you've got. We have a ton of old barns on this property, and they are all full of animals because we've been able to make minor changes and have pretty good outcomes. So even though you might be facing a challenge at home or work or whatever, just know that small steps can make a huge difference. So thanks for having me, guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Steph. And I'm going to turn it over to Margaret, who's got some words for you and for Josh.
On behalf of all 4-H vet and dairy science members, I would like to thank you, Josh, Arp, and Steph Towers, on coming on today and sharing your calf care and hoof trimming experience with us to learn with.
Excellent. Thanks, Margaret. And again, thanks to both Steph and Josh.